The village without a soul. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a winding strip of cracked asphalt cutting through dense, towering trees. The Carter family had been driving for hours, their destination buried deep within the wilderness. Thomas Carter, a man of quiet strength, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Beside him sat his wife, Evelyn, her fingers nervously tapping against the door. In the back seat, their two children, Daniel, a restless 12-year-old, and Emily, a quiet girl of 8, stared out the window, watching as the trees thickened, their shadows growing darker. "This place is in the middle of nowhere," Evelyn muttered, glancing at the GPS, which flickered uncertainly before shutting off completely. "It's supposed to be a fresh start," Thomas replied. "A simpler life, away from the noise of the city." But as they drove deeper into the unknown, the silence became heavy. There were no signs, no passing cars, no birds chirping, only the low hum of their tires against the road. The air seemed thick, pressing against the car like an invisible force. Then, at last, they saw it, a wooden sign, worn and barely legible. "Welcome to Black Hollow." Evelyn frowned. This wasn't on the map. They passed through the village's entrance, their tires crunching over gravel. Black Hollow was eerily still. Old houses lined the streets, their windows dark and vacant. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, spindly shadows across the ground. The town felt abandoned, yet something about it suggested otherwise. Then, a figure appeared. A woman, tall and gaunt, stood motionless in the middle of the road, staring directly at them. Her skin was pale, almost sickly, her eyes hollow and sunken. She didn't blink, didn't move. Thomas slowed the car. "What the hell?" The woman's lips parted slightly, as if whispering something. Evelyn reached for the window button, but before she could lower it, the woman turned abruptly and disappeared between two houses. Emily clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter. "I don't like this place," she whispered. "Let's just find the house," Thomas said, his voice uncertain for the first time. They drove past more houses, each one lifeless, empty. Yet the Carters felt unseen eyes watching them. When they finally reached the address, an old Victorian home at the edge of town, Evelyn hesitated before stepping out. The house loomed before them, its paint peeling, its windows covered in thick dust. But the strangest thing was the door. It was open. A slow creak echoed through the still air as the wind pushed it inward, revealing the dark interior. This isn't right," Evelyn murmured. Thomas took a breath. "We've come this far. Let's just go inside." Hesitant but with no other option, they crossed the threshold. The floor groaned under their weight. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by their presence. The house smelled of damp wood and something else, something rotten. A sudden noise broke the silence. A whisper. Emily gasped. "Who said that?" "Nobody said anything, honey," Evelyn assured her. But Daniel pointed toward the staircase, his face pale. "I heard it too." They turned, following his gaze. At the top of the stairs stood a figure. A little boy. His skin was ashen, his eyes hollow and black. He tilted his head, a slow, unnatural movement. Then he smiled. A deep, unnatural voice came from his small lips. "You shouldn't be here." The Carters stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, their breaths shallow, their bodies paralyzed by the sight of the boy at the top. His smile was too wide, his teeth small and sharp. His hollow, black eyes never blinked. For a long, excruciating moment, nobody moved. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the boy turned and walked into the darkness of the hallway, vanishing from sight. Evelyn grabbed Thomas's arm. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Thomas swallowed hard. It was probably just, he stopped himself. A trick of the light? A stray child? No explanation felt right. Daniel's voice was small. I don't think he was real. Emily clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter, her fingers digging into the worn fabric. He talked to us. A long silence stretched between them before Thomas took a deep breath. It's been a long day. Let's just get settled in. Evelyn hesitated but nodded. Whatever they had seen, whatever it was, could wait. Night fell over Black Hollow. Inside the house, the air was heavy and cold. The electricity was weak, the bulbs flickering erratically. Every floorboard groaned underfoot, and the pipes rattled as if the house were breathing. The Carters moved cautiously through the house, their unease growing with every passing minute. Daniel and Emily's room was at the end of the hall. It was sparse, 2 old wooden beds, a dusty dresser, and a single window covered with heavy curtains. Evelyn tucked them in, her hands shaking slightly. "If you need anything, we're right down the hall," she said. Emily pulled the blanket up to her chin. "What if the boy comes back?" Evelyn forced a smile. "There's no boy, sweetheart. It's just this old house playing tricks on us." But as she turned to leave, Daniel spoke in a whisper. "He wasn't playing." Evelyn paused, her heart thudding. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she kissed them both on the forehead and hurried to her own room. The house did not sleep. Somewhere deep in the walls, a faint scratching sound echoed through the silence. The wind outside had died, but the floorboards creaked as though someone was pacing just outside the bedrooms. At midnight, Evelyn awoke to a strange sound. A slow, rhythmic knocking. Knock. 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 She turned toward Thomas. He was sound asleep, his chest rising and falling in deep, steady breaths. She held her breath, listening. Knock. 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 It was coming from down the hall. From the children's room. Her body tensed as she slid out of bed. The air was freezing against her skin as she crept toward the hallway. The knocking continued, slow and deliberate. When she reached the door, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Knock. 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 She pushed the door open. The room was silent. Moonlight filtered in through a gap in the curtains, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. Daniel was sitting up in bed, his eyes wide and glassy. "Daniel?" Evelyn whispered. His voice was hollow. "He's here." A chill crawled up her spine. "Who?" Daniel turned his head toward the closet. Slowly. Mechanically. Evelyn followed his gaze. The closet door was slightly ajar. A breath of air escaped from the darkness inside. Then, ever so slowly, it began to creak open. The closet door creaked open, inch by inch, revealing only darkness inside. The room was deathly still, but Evelyn could feel it, the presence of something watching, something waiting. Daniel didn't move. He sat rigid in bed, his eyes locked onto the open space beyond the door. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Daniel, what did you see?" He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's in there. Watching." A sharp chill ran through her body. She stepped forward, slowly reaching for the closet door. The wood was ice-cold beneath her fingertips. Then, bang! The door slammed shut on its own, rattling the walls. Evelyn gasped, stumbling backward. Daniel let out a strangled cry, curling into himself. Emily whimpered under her blankets, clutching her stuffed rabbit so tightly her knuckles turned white. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from behind the closed closet door, something scratched. Slow. Deliberate. Fingernails against wood. Scratch. 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 Evelyn grabbed Daniel and Emily, pulling them from the bed. "We're going to our room. Now." She practically dragged them down the hall, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. When she reached her and Thomas's room, she shoved the door open. "Thomas, wake up." He groaned, sitting up groggily. "What's wrong?" Evelyn locked the door behind them, her hands shaking. "Something is in this house." Thomas frowned, rubbing his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Daniel spoke first. "The boy, he was in our closet. I saw him." Thomas exhaled sharply, trying to remain calm. "It's just this old house." A sudden, violent thud rattled the bedroom door. Evelyn gasped. Emily buried her face in her mother's chest. Another thud. And another. Each one heavier, angrier. Then a voice. "Let me in." Thomas jumped to his feet. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, the doorknob began to turn, slowly, deliberately. Evelyn pressed herself and the children against the far wall. Thomas grabbed a lamp, holding it like a weapon. The knob twisted harder. The door creaked under the pressure. And then it stopped. A long, excruciating silence filled the room. Nobody dared to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, Thomas inched toward the door and pressed his ear against it. Nothing. Finally, he took a deep breath and unlocked the door. Slowly, carefully, he pulled it open. The hallway was empty. But something was different. The house felt wrong. The air was thick, suffocating. The walls seemed to pulse, as if they were alive. A heavy stillness settled over everything. Then they heard it. Footsteps. From the floor above them. Slow, heavy footsteps. One step. Another. Then another. Something was walking through their house. And it wasn't alone. More footsteps joined in. Soft at first, then growing louder. Multiple sets, pacing back and forth, circling above them. Emily whimpered. "Who are they?" Thomas's face was pale. "We need to leave." Evelyn nodded. "Now." She scooped Emily into her arms, Daniel clutching her hand tightly. Thomas grabbed his phone, but the screen was dead, no signal, no power. As they moved toward the stairs, the footsteps above them stopped. The silence was worse. Then, the air turned ice-cold. A low whisper crawled through the darkness. "You can't leave." The next second, the lights went out. And the screaming began. The house plunged into darkness. Evelyn clutched Emily close, feeling the child's tiny body trembling against her own. Daniel squeezed her hand so tightly it hurt. Thomas fumbled in the pitch black, his breathing fast and ragged. Somewhere in the house, the screaming continued, high-pitched, distorted, inhuman. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, surrounding them, drowning out their thoughts. Then, silence. The quiet was worse. A voice, cold and rasping, whispered through the walls. "You were never meant to leave." A sharp, stinging cold washed over them. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, something rotting. Then, from above, the footsteps started again. But this time, they were coming down the stairs. Thomas grabbed Evelyn's arm. "Run!" They bolted. The house seemed to shift, the walls stretching, the hallway warping as they moved. No matter how fast they ran, the front door never got closer. And then, Emily screamed. Evelyn turned just in time to see something dragging the little girl back. A pair of gray, lifeless hands had emerged from the darkness, clutching her ankle, pulling her toward the staircase. "No!" Evelyn lunged forward, grabbing Emily's arms, yanking her free. The hands slithered back into the shadows, retreating, but not gone. "Keep moving!" Thomas yelled. The front door was suddenly there, as if the house had been toying with them, deciding whether to let them go. Thomas wrenched it open. A cold wind howled through the doorway, and for the first time since they arrived, they could see Black Hollow beyond the threshold. But the village had changed. It was no longer still. No longer quiet. The houses that had once been dark and lifeless now glowed faintly, an eerie blue light spilling from their windows. And in the streets, they stood. Dozens of them. Pale figures. Hollow-eyed. Soulless. They lined the road, motionless, their empty gazes locked onto the carters. Some looked old, some young, but all shared the same gaunt faces and dead stares. And at the center of them stood the boy from the staircase. He smiled. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice layered with others, voices from the past, from the dead. Evelyn backed away. "What do you want from us?" The boy's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "You belong to the village now." Behind them, the house groaned. The walls began to close in, dark tendrils creeping toward them, reaching, desperate to pull them back inside. Thomas grabbed Evelyn's hand. "Run! Now!" They sprinted down the road. The villagers did not move, did not chase. They only watched. As they passed the last house, Evelyn turned back one final time. The villagers were fading, their bodies dissolving into mist. The glowing windows of the houses blinked out, one by one, until Black Hollow vanished completely. The carters kept running, their lungs burning, until at last they reached their car, right where they had left it. Thomas yanked open the door, shoving the kids inside. Evelyn jumped into the passenger seat. He turned the key. For a terrifying moment, the engine stalled. Then, roar. The car started. He slammed the gas. They sped down the road, tires kicking up gravel. Trees blurred past. The village was gone, the road stretching endlessly ahead. For miles, nobody spoke. Finally, Emily whispered, "Did we escape?" Thomas didn't answer. Evelyn turned, glancing back at the children. They were pale, shaken, but alive. Then she noticed something. Daniel's stuffed rabbit was gone. Emily's was in her lap. But Daniel's, the one that had been with him since he was a baby, was missing. She turned fully now, heart pounding. "Daniel, where's your rabbit?" Daniel's face was blank. Then, slowly, he smiled. A too wide, unnatural smile. And in a voice that was not his own, he whispered, "You can never leave." The end.